Hi guys, welcome to another episode on my YouTube channel. And today what we're going to be talking about is making assumptions in relationships. And I wanted to bring this up because so often I hear about how we get caught in an assumption story and we start making decisions based on assumptions in our relationship. So I wanted to just talk about why or how we make assumptions and what to do about it and what we can do instead. So there's a few things. There's a couple of resources that I'll put in the comment section, but one of my favorite books is The 4 Agreements and the Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. And in the 4 Agreements, he talks about don't make assumptions as one of the agreements. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that he points out in his book. The second book is The 7 Principles to Making a Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman. In there, he talks about the 4 horsemen. And really, you can just type in the 4 horsemen to your YouTube video, or I did do a YouTube video on the 4 horsemen. But anyways, in his book, he talks about when the 4 horsemen show up, one of the horsemen is contempt. And when there's contempt, it's often that we have disgust or we don't have any respect for our partner anymore. And it's one of the leading causes of divorce or separation in a relationship. But underneath the contempt is assumption making. So, that's another one that we're going to talk about. And then Brene Brown has a clip, it's one of my favorite clips, where she talks about boundaries and empathy. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's a saying in there that the most generous assumption, so a time that it's maybe okay to make an assumption, the most generous assumption that we can make is assuming that the other person is doing their best. So I'm going to talk more about that too. So, let's talk about assumptions and when they show up in our relationships. And what I see often in my practice is we are starting to not communicate as clearly, where, there's a little bit more conflict, or we don't feel seen or heard, or, even in dating relationships, when we're kind of in that first stage of dating, and a lot of times I hear about ghosting. And, and then when we're ghosted, which means the person we were talking to someone, we thought things were going really great, and then all of a sudden the person disappears, we start making assumptions about what happened. We want an answer. We want to know what happened. And whether it's the ghosting thing or in our relationships, if there's conflict, we start making these assumptions about what's going on with the other person or what happened. And really underneath some of this is we want to feel safe. And our brain is constantly trying to figure things out. Even if, in an assumption, we start to kind of create this story. And in this story, we make decisions. And Brene Brown talks about, what's the story I'm telling myself? Because often the story I'm telling myself isn't really what's happening. It's something that I perceive, something that I'm seeing. It's an assumption, oftentimes based on something that's like a fear or an insecurity. And I'm not saying that's, guys, we all have insecurities, so I'm not saying that's bad. It's just what it is. In a relationship, we want to feel safe and secure. And so if we notice a partner is distancing, or we're in a lot of conflict, or we start to lose respect for our partner, which, the roots of contempt are based off of unmet expectations that aren't clearly communicated, and really expectations can be detrimental in a relationship, which lead to resentment, which leads to contempt. And all of that is fueled by assumptions. So, one of the things, so in Don Miguel's book, The 4 Agreements, when he talks about assumptions, he does talk about that they're often fueled by this. He talks about toxicity. Assumptions create a lot of toxicity, and how they are really detrimental to relationships. And in assumptions, we tend to take things personal. And when we take them personal, we suffer. And then the relationship suffers. And, he does say that sometimes there's assumptions are about control. And, the way I interpret that is a lot of times when in a relationship, when we start to feel like things are out of control, and we want to control it because we want to control it to feel safe, we start to make assumptions. And then we make decisions based on those assumptions. And again, like I said earlier, those can be very detrimental. And so, we need answers. He talks about we need these answers because, again, we want to feel safe or we're afraid. And so if our partner's not communicating, or like in ghosting, if our partner's not communicating, or the person we were talking to, we need answers, and we're not going to get it from the other person. And, so I have a saying that don't make assumptions, ask questions. And sometimes it's really scary to ask those questions because we open ourselves up. We become vulnerable. Vulnerability is not bad, and it's not a weakness. Vulnerability is a good thing, so it's okay to ask questions. Now, in relationships, when I start to have this assumption, or when I try to create a story, or if I remember Brene Brown's topic, like what's the story I'm telling myself, I'm able to do some self-reflection. What's true and what's my assumption? And I think that's really important because I can go to my partner and say, like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I see things, can we talk things out? And it leads to a greater understanding, which leads to, like, Gottman's contempt. And the antidote to contempt is being able to describe how you feel, or what you need, or what you're going to do, instead of assuming what the other person's going to say, what the other person's going to do, or how the other person feels. And the other antidote is creating a culture of appreciation, so finding things that you appreciate about your spouse or partner. But I think, going back to the first antidote, being able just to describe how you feel, or what you need, or what you're going to do, instead of making the assumption. And a lot of times, part of assumption making is, okay, well, I know my partner or spouse is going to do this, this, or this, so I'm going to do this. Which means you've already created a story, you've assumed how your partner's going to react or respond, and then you're doing something different without even talking to your spouse or partner. And so again, it creates more distance and more disconnect in your relationship. However, if you went to your partner and said, I'm feeling disconnected, lost, unheard, whatever that is, it creates a conversation. Couples come in and they say they've stopped communicating. They've stopped communicating for many different reasons. And one of those reasons is they've started to make assumptions and guessed how the other person feels or what they're going to do. And so there's no room to come together and talk. So, it's like, wait a minute, time out. Before you start just guessing, it's come together. And the saying that I know I've said in many videos, like, you cannot not communicate. So if you think about it, if you're making assumptions, guessing how your partner is going to react or respond, and then, you start to just do things, what are you communicating to your partner? You're either communicating they're not capable, you don't believe in them, you don't think you're going to create like a quote-unquote successful conversation. You're basically communicating dismissiveness. So, it's really important to kind of look at and say, well, wait a minute. If I'm creating this assumption, or the story I'm telling myself, and making decisions in these stories, when is there any room for my partner to be able to show up? And when do I open up to allow that process, or do I just stay closed? It's okay to find your voice, to ask the question. I get that there's a risk, but to really be in a relationship, we have to risk. We have to be open and allow vulnerability, allow openness and honesty to occur. And if we're in a spot where we just keep shutting down, then when is there room to heal the relationship, connect, or repair? Instead, we just stay stuck in the assumption story, which is when contempt really comes out. Have the courage, you're brave, you're strong, to turn towards and ask your partner these questions. And I think that that's really important to remind yourself. that we need to say, okay, catch yourself in the assumption. You know, some of this, I'm not asking your partner to call you out. I'm not asking you to call out your partner. You know, do some self-reflection. Catch yourself in the assumption. When there's ghosting, guys, like, you know, I'm going to do a whole separate video on that. You know, I think sometimes this is just, maybe you don't want to I'm not saying reach out to the person that's ghosting you and try and figure out what's going on. Walk away and find ways to take care of yourself. And again, I'll do a whole nother video on that. But when you're in a relationship, when you start making assumptions, and this is even maybe with friends and with family members, you know, create space for open communication. Stand strong in showing up and allowing yourself to be seen and heard and connecting. So I think that's really important. And then, you know, the other thing about Brene Brown's video, or the other thing about Brene Brown, when she talks about boundaries and empathy, when you are able to assume, this is a time, and I even say this to my couples in therapy, the time to make an assumption about your partner is to assume that maybe they're doing their best. And, you know, Brene Brown says, you know, maybe their best isn't okay for you, but if you allow yourself to assume the other person's doing their best, it changes parts of you to see that person through a more compassionate lens instead of through an angry lens and push away lens. To have compassion for someone helps, again, not only you establish and create or talk about your boundaries, but it helps you see them in a different light. Again, it doesn't say, oh, what you're doing is okay. It's just saying, okay, if you're showing up in your best, it kind of eases you to see them differently instead of just staying in an angry place and assuming and, oh, they're just trying to hurt me. You don't know. You know, you don't know what's going on with them. And oftentimes we take things personal that we don't need to. If someone is attacking you, it doesn't mean it's about you. It means it's about them. And I know in the moment it's really hard to understand that. It's like, but I'm feeling attacked. Of course you're going to, but don't take it personal. Taking it personal, again, leads to more assumption making. So don't make assumptions, ask questions, guys. Be courageous to find that voice within you. Remember, you're brave and you're strong, and ask the questions that need to be asked in your relationship. If someone's ghosting you, you know, again, just say, okay, I've got to find something to take care of myself. I don't know what's going on with that person, nor am I meant to. It is what it is. I know that's easier said than done. And, you know, remember, when we start to make assumptions, we want to feel safe. So what if you went to your partner instead and talked about creating reassurance? The most important thing is ask the questions, come together, communicate and talk to one another. Assumptions lead to disconnect, lead to unhealthy relationships, lead to stories that we create in our mind. It's a fantasy that then create a lot of harm or hurt to the relationship and to each other. So don't be afraid to ask questions. When you catch yourself in the assumption story, use Brene Brown's statement, like, what's the story I'm telling myself? Use Gottman's words, like, how am I feeling? What do I need? And go to your partner instead of creating and staying in that assumption story. You know, open yourself up to ask the questions, even tough questions, you know, to create connection, most importantly, to create understanding in your relationship. All right, guys, so don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't make assumptions, ask questions. Don't forget that. All right, I hope you have a great day. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for weekly updates all about relationships and mental health. Have a great day.